On today's video, we're going to revisit Apple IIe project that we have restored in another video. Link in description if you want to watch the restoration too. This Apple had a massive explosion in the power supply in its previous life, probably back in the 90s, because the replacement reefer had started to crack too when it got to me. I obviously replaced it again for another brand. I also cleaned up the incredible mess that whoever repaired it the first time forgot to clean. This Apple came without any cards, drives or a display, so it's quite useless as it is right now. Since I got it, I have been on the lookout for parts and eventually found these two Disk 2 drives. Today we're going to restore two floppy drives and a period correct display and see if we can get it up and running with the game. I did some retrobrite to the case after we had done the restoration, and it looks pretty good now, but it's not quite finished, so I left the badges off. And after we have washed the drives, I will try to color match it to the paints on the drives. The drives are made of painted aluminium, so they don't yellow as badly as the plastic case. There was a label here that fell off, so now we can see how incredibly grimy these drives are. This is probably what the original color should be. I think these drives are missing two labels, because on the pictures I have seen online they are numbered 1 and 2. But I have also seen someone replace them with aftermarket stickers, so I'll see if I can find a set of those. I wasn't able to find a lot of information about these drives, but from what I could find online, there were at least two manufacturers of these, Shugart and Alps, and I think these are Shugart because they have these rainbow colored ribbon cables. The later Alps I think had grey cables, so this is probably a better match for an Apple II or Apple II Plus. These drives came with a controller, and the date on those chips are all from 1981, so that's probably when these drives were made too. Okay, let's get inside and see what we will find. So I'm definitely no expert at Apple II. I had one on loan for about a year as a young teenager, but I also had my Commodore 64 at the time, so I tended to play games on the Commodore instead of using the Apple II. Okay, the lid seems to slide out from the back, and inside here is probably what the original color should be, so the IIe definitely needs a few more hours in peroxide. So here's something strange. The case has vent holes, but on the inside they're covered with tape, so apparently Voz thought he needed some more airflow, but then decided he didn't. And inside here it actually looks pretty good. And these drives have a pretty interesting story. Apple didn't want to pay the high price to Shugart for these drives, so they ordered some drives without electronics, and then Voz designed this board here. That way they lowered the price significantly on these drives. And according to one article I found online, one of the engineers at Shugart admitted that they had sent some faulty units to Apple, hoping they couldn't make this work and order full price drives with the electronics installed. But that trick didn't work on Apple. Wow, that is a crusty connector. Okay, so there's one pin missing here, and one of the connections on this connector here is blanked off, so it's keyed. And the edge connector here seems to have some kind of locks. Never seen this before. So it has 4 tabs on the connector and 2 holes here that lock the connector in place. The ribbon cable isn't keyed, so I need to remember to install it this way again. So let's remove the 2 screws on the PCB. If you have been inside a drive in a 5150, you can clearly see how much Voz simplified this design. Okay, and underneath here it also looks super clean. So these drives have been stored really well. Dates on the chips on the controller are from mid-1981 too. There is some dust and cobweb, so I'll remove the drive completely from the case to get better access to clean. Yeah, this drive is pretty clean already, but I don't see any stickers from Shugart, so there's really no need to wash the drive. I'm just going to use some compressed air and get that dust out. So taping those vent holes was probably a good idea, otherwise they would have been filled up with dust. And I don't see why they would need that much cooling anyways. Yeah, same thing with this drive. It's already pretty clean inside. Yeah, super shiny in here too. Very common fault with these sugar drives is the latch here. I'll put a link down below to how you can fix these drives if your latch breaks. Date codes from mid-1981 here too, so probably a matching set. Okay, one last before picture. And here's the result after the wash. That made a huge difference. These covers look a million times better than before. So I'm pretty pleased with this, but they're not perfect. This cover here still has some square marks here. They are from the rubber feet. So the other drive was obviously sitting on top of this drive and left those marks. The camera doesn't do a good job, but they are clearly visible here in real life. So let's try with some Windex. I'll wait for a few seconds and then try with a microfiber cloth. No, that's not working. You can hardly see them on camera, but they are actually quite ugly, so I need to get them off the case. That green cutting mat messes with my settings in the camera and changes the color temperature. So let's move to this side of the bench. And perhaps you can see now that the drive that was sitting on top has actually gone more yellow than the drive underneath. So paint does go yellow too, but nowhere near as much as plastics. And this is not enough to bother me, so I'm just going to leave it like this. But I want to get those marks off. So let's try with some IPA. I'll reapply it a couple of times, and we'll see if this helps. No, that's not working either. Check my preview screen, you can't actually see it. But there is a black square here that gets overexposed by the camera. Well, from this angle, I think you can see this mark here. And the drive basically has one on each corner. So let's try with a magic eraser and IPA. The stuff makes microscopic scratches in the paint. They are normally not visible, so if nothing else helps, this is the way to go. And that totally works. So let's fix these at the back too. Yep, totally fixed it. So this case looks pretty much brand new now. I didn't think it would, because it was so grimy. This case has a mark here from a sticker. So let's try the same methods. Windex first, and a microfiber cloth. This method doesn't scratch the paint, but it didn't remove those marks either. So let's try with IPA. I'll wait and reapply a couple of times. Okay, let's try with a microfiber cloth. Yeah, that totally fixed it. There's a tiny bit left, so I'll just repeat that process once more. I used some compressed air and a brush and cleaned out all the dust from both drives. And hopefully that will prevent any future read errors. So, as I mentioned earlier, a common issue with Shugart drives is this door here. So this is how it works. When you open the door, it slides into these two rails here. And at the same time it lifts this disc here and frees up the floppy. And when you push it again, it slides back on the two rails here and pushes this disc on the floppy. So what I think happens here is that the grease dries up inside these rails here, and this part here breaks. So if you have seen my repair video, you know how to fix it. But the best option, of course, is to prevent it. These are plastic parts, so I'm using PTFE grease, because PTFE is kind on plastics. So if we open up the door now, it immediately made a huge difference. And it slides much easier and doesn't make that awful noise it did a moment ago. If you turn the drive upside down, there is a hinge on this door too. This one is a bit trickier to reach, so I'm gonna have to use a toothpick and place one drop on each side. And now that door is almost completely silent and it's not making any noises whatsoever. And hopefully this is enough to make that door last. The next thing I want to do is to remove the sticker on the motor. Unfortunately it's falling apart, so I'm gonna have to replace it with a new sticker. And now I have access to the shaft and the bearing inside the motor. And now we can place a tiny drop of oil on the shaft. I'll clean this area quite thoroughly so the new sticker will actually stick to the motor. Okay, I found a suitable replacement. And this should prevent any dust from going inside the motor. I would often also disassemble and remove this disc here and grease it with PTFE. But in this case, I think I'm gonna skip it because it's not making any noises. So let's skip it, at least for now. And if it turns out to be noisy, we'll fix it later. Okay, time for a test. So this ribbon cable here is not keyed, so pay attention when you reinstall it. Otherwise you're going to kill some of the chips here with 12 volts. I always take pictures when I disassemble stuff, in case the cable isn't keyed, like in this case here. Now we can install the floppy controller in slot 6. The Apple II starts looking for a bootable device from slot 7 here at this end, and then it continues to the next slot if it doesn't find anything. I think slot 6 is the standard. So let's start with the cleaning disk and turn the power on. Okay, the floppy is moving inside that drive, but the motor is not making any noises. But I think we have a minor issue with this disc here. So I guess I should have greased it. So I'm going to close the door to push that disc down. If you remove this part here to get better access, then you will have to realign the head. So let's see if we can fix this without removing it. So first we need to remove this clip here. I have previously used a drop of oil instead of disassembling it, but that oil ended up on my floppy, so I'm going to use grease instead. Now let's carefully open up the door and see if we can remove the entire assembly. And unfortunately, no, we can't. Well, that sucks. But there might be another way to do this without having to realign the heads. And that is by removing the front panel. And on this drive it's held down by 2 screws on each side. The Shugart drives in my IBMs are slightly different actually. They have screws underneath. The sole assembly here is spring-loaded, so ideally I would remove the front panel before I remove that clip. So I'm gonna have to be a bit more careful here. But I think we can move it away just enough so we can get access. And here it comes. And if you're watching this because you have disassembled your drive, first we have the clip, then we have this washer, and then the spring. Okay, I had to remove this off camera. So this disc here has some edges that I had to push out of the way. And that freed up this part here. And underneath there is a second spring. And here we also have a second washer. Okay, I just realized I have been recording for 10 minutes without the microphone. So I'm gonna have to re-record this part. So being a petrol head, I think these 2 parts act as a clutch. So I'm not going to apply any grease between the 2 discs. But I did place a drop of oil on the bearing. And then I cleaned up all the excess oil. So there's no risk of it dropping down on the floppy. And then I applied some lithium grease on the shaft here before I put it back on. And same thing with this washer here. Now we can put the spring back on. I'll apply some more lithium grease on the spring here, because it's not touching plastics. And here's our complete assembly. And hopefully the floppy won't wobble now. Now we can put the entire assembly back into the drive. I'll lock it in place with the clip next. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, I heard it reading, but I don't have a display hooked up yet, so don't know if it works yet. But I'll do a couple of reboots and just make sure it behaves normally. So if we look at the floppy now, the wobbling is gone. Oh, I just realized something here. I completely forgot to grease the shafts here. I'll fix it in a minute, but before I do, let's check the behavior of the head. Yeah, it's banging the head to get to track 0, and then it moves forward. So I think it read the floppy. So as the drive reads the floppy, it moves the head on these two rails here. So I'm going to push them all the way forward. And this part is plastic. So I'm going to use PTFE. And there's very little grease needed. And then I'm going to push them all the way back to track 0. And grease this end too. So now the heads can move freely. And since we have the drive apart again, we might as well check if the stepper is engaged to the head by turning it. And it seems to be working as it should. This connector was really tough to remove and put back on again. So I'm going to place a drop of DeoxIT on each pin, because it probably has a minor corrosion on it. Yeah, that's much better. I totally fixed it. And I almost missed it, but I didn't. We've got some nasty little tantalums here from 1981. I'll insert a scene from a previous video if you don't know what happens to these if you don't replace them. Because we didn't in the 5155 project. These are 0.47 and unfortunately I don't have any in my stash. But I have placed an order, so we're just gonna have to hope that they will last for a few days. And then we'll replace them next time the Apple IIe is on the bench. And there are 3 of these in each drive, in case you're ordering parts for your project. Okay, I gave the second drive here the same treatment. So let's power it on and see how it behaves. Okay, it made some noises, but then it went silent. But it is spinning. So let's clean the head with a cleaning disc. The disc is moving slightly, but there's no significant wobble like we had in that first drive. Okay, that should be enough. So let's try with the ProDOS floppy. Okay, it banged the head, and now the head is moving. So I think it loaded ProDOS, but I can't be sure until we have hooked up a display. And that brings us to this gorgeous Sony solid-state video monitor. Now you may have expected an Apple II display, and you wouldn't have been wrong if our Apple on the bench here would have been manufactured just a few months later, because the Apple II display actually didn't exist when this machine was manufactured, and instead people were using something like this. Now I also don't have an Apple II display. If I had one, I would of course have used it with this machine. It is a really good match for the Apple IIe. But since I don't, we might as well go period correct and use this gorgeous Sony. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find any information about this display at all. But let's see if we can make it work anyways. It doesn't have a connector for composite at the back, but it has this really weird connector on the side instead. When I got this Sony, I noticed it said 15 volts. 1 amp charging at the back. So I took it apart to remove the battery, but I couldn't find any, so I guess the previous owner removed it. I also checked this connector here and marked the pins. So the pins marked with green are connected to ground, and the red connections are connected to something else. But then I just ended up putting it aside. I forgot all about it until today. I did some more reading online, and according to Google, 1970s Sony monitor will likely expect analog video signal, such as composite. And then I also found this web page here that states these 8-pin rectangular connectors have been used to connect video monitors to VTRs. A VTR is a tape recorder designed to record and playback video and audio from magnetic tape. So this is really old school stuff. I'd love to have one of these. They look awesome. On this page we can also read that Sony and Panasonic both use the wiring as shown on this page. So for example, the VTR's video output on pin 2 goes to the monitor's video input on pin 2. Okay, I think that's enough information for us to do a test. I took the set apart. And my usual disclaimer, of course, please don't mess around inside CRT displays. they can be charged with high voltages, even with the cord unplugged. That being said, I don't think I have ever turned this set on, so it's probably not charged with anything. On the tube here we have a sticker that says Tokyo, Japan, so good stuff for sure. And it looks very much like 70s electronics. There is a sticker here that says 739, so it's probably manufactured in week 39 of 1977. I went through my stash and I found this old audio plug and soldered the center pin to pin 2 and ground to ground on this connector here. Ideally we would use shielded cable, but this is what I was able to find, so it will have to do for this first test. Okay, the Apple II is now plugged in to the very bodgy connector on the side here, and the video recorder switch is set to VTR. By the way, I did some more reading about these drives, and apparently these are Alps. They are very similar, so they are quite hard to tell apart actually. So the information I found earlier about these rainbow-colored cables, that was actually incorrect. And apparently they were used for both Shugart and Alps drives. So then we know. Okay, the Sony is plugged in, but power not turned on. Here goes. Okay, nothing bad happened. Let's turn the set on. Okay, it's making a noise from the speaker. We're getting something on the screen here. The adjustment knobs seems to be working, but I was expecting a black screen. Okay, let's turn the Apple on and see what happens. Well, unfortunately, nothing much. We still have this crap on the screen. And as I turn the adjustment knobs, the speaker is making some nasty noises. I messed around with the cable here, and I can faintly see Apple II displayed down here. So it is trying to work, but something is really messed up. Okay, I moved in closer. So hopefully you can see now that it actually says Apple II here. But something isn't syncing properly. Okay, now we actually got a stable image, but it's still messed up. So vertical sync seems to be correctly set now. And if I turn the brightness down, it's actually perfectly readable. And I notice my camera is not syncing to this refresh rate. So it's flashing on camera, but in real life the image is actually stable. But what's up with these lines here? Is this just a crappy connector? Or is this display expecting something else on that video in pin? It could of course be faulty too. I bought this set untested. Okay, so I have the vertical synced cranked down all the way to one end to get a stable image. So this is probably where we have the issue. I'm gonna guess it's out of range. And unfortunately I don't know enough about TV sets to understand what's going on here. So I guess I'll ask the expert panel. If anyone watching this knows what might be going on here, then please share. It is almost working. Yeah, with these settings here, we actually have a usable image, but it's too far down. So this text here should be up here. We can't see what's further down on the display. So if I turn the machine off, you can probably hear the noise coming from the speaker. That's an easy fix. We can just disconnect it. Or maybe shielded cable will solve the issue too. Okay, I tried the different settings on the camera. Now we can actually see what I see here. The image is perfectly stable, but it's too far down. Crap, that sucks. But since it's almost working, I think this might be fixable. Perhaps with some help with someone who knows more about these sets than I do. There are some adjustment pots underneath, but I don't have the service manual. I don't even have the user manual. I know the image started to move up and down, but with some adjustments it stabilized again. Yeah, that's actually super stable. It looks pretty perfect, but in the wrong place. Man, I really wish we had a service manual. There are 3 pots underneath here, but they're just marked VR 1, 2 and 3. Well, I guess we could mess around with them and see what happens. Maybe we get lucky. Oh, now I have a different image, but I haven't made any adjustments. So now we can actually see the cursor. Okay, I found the right tool for these knobs. Let's mess around with them and see what happens. Okay, this pot moves the image up and down. And if we turn it all the way down to one side, that nasty noise actually disappeared. But the image started to flicker. And the image is still not in the correct position. So let's try the next pot. Okay, it stretches the image and moves it down. Or make it thinner and move it up. So that's not it. So how about this guy here? Okay, it moves the image sideways. And then goes out of sync. And it was difficult to set back to where it was. So probably some mild corrosion in that pot. So this issue clearly has something to do with the vertical adjustment. It just won't go high enough. And in this position here, that nasty noise disappears. So I think the noise has something to do with this issue too. I reconnected the floppy controller. Let's see if it will boot to ProDOS. Well, it doesn't. The disk just keeps spinning and it doesn't boot. So how about the other drive? Oh, we've got an error. So perhaps that floppy is bad. Let's try with a different floppy. Okay, that was just a bad floppy. Now that's interesting. The graphics just changed completely. So now we seem to have some graphics higher up on the screen. And this is an original floppy from Apple. Okay, so part of the display is stretched. And that's probably because I messed around with one of these pots. Yeah, this is the highest I can go. If I move the image further up, it gets distorted. Well, I did some more reading, and everywhere I could read said that this connector here is expecting just a regular composite signal. So next I grabbed my fully working 2C, just to make sure that the 2E here doesn't have an issue. So let's give this a try. Yeah, we're getting the same issue here. So 2C is in the middle instead of being up here. And the graphics up here are completely messed up. Okay, so the Apple is good and the signal is correct. So the issue is definitely with the gorgeous Sony here. As a final test, I decided to connect the Commodore 64 just to get more graphics on the display and see what's going on here. And it's displaying Commodore 64 Basic V2 on this line here. But then it jumps up here with the ready prompt. And then I think it's repeating the graphics, but in just compressed thin lines up here. So unfortunately I'm pretty sure this is a faulty display. That really sucks. The thing is so cool. It would really be a shame if we can't make it useful somehow. So any suggestions are welcome. And I'm more than happy to try to repair this display in a future video. Okay, so we know that this drive is working. But how about the second drive? Now it's spinning and it's reading, and I think it's working. And it totally does. Awesome. Unfortunately, I don't have the super serial card. I only have the simpler serial card for this machine. So I can't use ADT Pro to make discs. And I also have 5 more slots to fill here. So I guess I'll keep looking for cards. Or maybe I can find some fun projects to build for this machine. That would be even better. It's kind of funny that the cables for the floppies don't connect at the back of the machine. Instead we have to thread them through a hole here and then connect directly on the controller inside. But these were the early days of computers. So I guess people were still figuring it out. The drives, by the way, look great. They look pretty much brand new. I'll see if I can find some replacement stickers. And the case is back from Retrobrite. Now let's see how it looks. Not bad. It's not perfect. It's still brighter in this area. that has been shielded away from the sun. But it looks pretty damn good. Let's see how it matches those drives. Not bad. And again, not perfect, but I'm gonna call that good enough. When I remove badges, I leave them on double-sided tape. That way I have fresh adhesive when it's time to put them back on. So now I can just peel the back off. This guy belongs here. And Apple badge goes up here, of course. And finally, the 2E badge. And that finishes this restoration project. Before I put the lid back on, I did a visual inspection, just in case something had started to leak. But everything looked okay. So unfortunately, no visual clues. Well, not quite what I was hoping for today, but you can almost play Load Runner, so I think this display is fixable. Don't forget to leave a comment if you have any thoughts on what I should try next. And I'll keep looking for parts and probably some projects, so we can continue this project. But that's all I had for you today, and I'll see you guys again next week.